Captain Emma looked like any regular airline pilot. 236 passengers trusted her for a simple flight to Denver. Nobody knew her secret: she was a Top Gun fighter pilot. When both engines failed and death seemed certain, her hidden military skills became their only hope for survival. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Captain Emma Phoenix Rodriguez was just another commercial pilot at Skyline Airlines. Every morning she walked into work wearing her blue uniform, carrying her flight bag like hundreds of other pilots. Nobody knew her secret. Emma had been flying passenger jets for 5 years. Her co-workers thought she learned to fly at a regular flight school, then worked her way up from small regional airlines. They had no idea about her real past. The truth was different. Emma was once Lieutenant Commander Emma Rodriguez, call sign Phoenix. She had graduated from the Navy's elite Top Gun program, the most advanced fighter pilot training in the world. She flew F-18 Super Hornets in combat missions. She could handle any aircraft in any situation. But Emma kept this secret hidden. She never talked about her military days. When other pilots discussed their backgrounds, she just smiled and said she learned to fly the usual way. Nobody questioned it. On Tuesday morning, Emma checked the schedule. She was assigned Flight 447 to Denver, a Boeing 777 with 236 passengers. It seemed like another routine flight. "Morning, Emma," said Tom, the operations manager. "Full plane today. Weather looks perfect for most of the trip." "Sounds good," Emma replied, checking her paperwork. "Any issues I should know about?" "Nope, all clear. Have a safe flight." Emma walked to the aircraft. Flight 447 was a big Boeing 777, one of the largest passenger planes. She did her pre-flight check, looking at the engines, wings, and control surfaces. Everything looked normal. Her co-pilot for today was Jake Miller, a friendly guy with 10 years of flying experience. "Ready for another day of flying the friendly skies?" Jake joked as they entered the cockpit. "Always," Emma smiled back. Jake had no idea he was sitting next to one of the Navy's best former fighter pilots. The flight attendants came to introduce themselves. There was Rachel, the head attendant, plus 4 others. They all seemed nice and professional. "Captain Rodriguez, we have a full plane today," Rachel reported. "Lots of families going to Denver for vacation." "That's great," Emma said. "Let's give them a smooth ride." As passengers boarded, Emma watched them through the small cockpit window. Families with children, business travelers, elderly couples, all trusting her to get them safely to Denver. None of them knew they were in the hands of someone trained to fly the world's most advanced fighter jets. One passenger, a little girl, waved at the cockpit window as she walked by. Emma waved back with a warm smile. At 9:15 a.m., Flight 447 pushed back from the gate. Emma started the engines and got clearance from air traffic control. "Skyline 447, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 24 right," came the voice from the control tower. "Roger, tower." Skyline 447 rolling. The big Boeing gathered speed down the runway. At 160 miles per hour, Emma pulled back on the controls and the plane lifted smoothly into the morning sky. The takeoff was perfect. For the first hour, everything went exactly as planned. The weather was clear, the plane was running perfectly, and the passengers were settling in for what they expected to be a boring routine flight to Denver. But at 10:30 a.m., everything changed. Emma was reviewing the flight plan when she heard an unusual sound from the left engine. A low rumbling that wasn't normal. "Did you hear that?" she asked Jake. "Yeah, what was that?" Jake looked at the engine displays on his screen. Suddenly, warning lights started flashing red across the control panel. The left engine was showing major problems. "Engine number 1 is failing," Jake shouted, reading the warnings. "Oil pressure dropping fast." Emma's training kicked in immediately. Not her commercial pilot training, but her Top Gun military training. In fighter jets, engine failures happened fast and you had to react even faster. "I'm shutting down engine 1, Emma said calmly, her hands moving quickly across the controls. She followed the emergency procedures, cutting fuel to the damaged engine and adjusting power to the remaining engine. The Boeing 777 could fly on one engine, but it would be more difficult. "Skyline 447, this is Denver Center," came the voice from air traffic control. "We're showing an emergency squawk. What's your status?" "Denver Center, Skyline 447 declaring an emergency. We've lost our left engine and are continuing on one engine." In the passenger cabin, people started to notice something was wrong. The plane felt different. Some passengers looked worried. Rachel, the head flight attendant, called the cockpit. "Captain, passengers are asking questions." "What should I tell them?" "Tell them we have a minor mechanical issue but everything is under control," Emma replied. She didn't want to panic anyone yet. But then things got much worse. At 10:45 a.m., 15 minutes after the first engine failed, warning alarms started screaming in the cockpit. "Engine 2 is overheating," Jake yelled, his voice filled with panic. "Temperature is way too high." Emma looked at the readings. The remaining engine was running so hot it could explode at any moment. If they lost the second engine, they would have no power at all. A 180-ton airplane would become a giant glider with 236 people on board. "We need to reduce power on engine 2 or we'll lose it too," Emma said. "But if we reduce power, we can't maintain altitude," Jake protested. "We'll start falling." Emma's mind raced through the options. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation they trained for at Top Gun. When everything goes wrong and you have no good choices, you find a way to make the impossible possible. "I'm reducing power to engine 2 to keep it from exploding," Emma decided. "We're going to have to glide." She pulled back the throttle. The remaining engine's temperature started to drop, but the plane began losing altitude. "Skyline 447, Denver Center. We show you descending. Confirm your intentions." "Denver Center, we're losing both engines. Requesting vectors to the nearest airport for emergency landing." "Roger 447. Nearest airport is Colorado Springs, bearing 180, distance 90 miles. 90 miles. Emma quickly calculated in her head. At their current glide rate, they would lose about 2,000 feet per minute. They were at 35,000 feet now. That gave them maybe 15 to 17 minutes before they hit the ground. But 90 miles in 15 minutes meant they needed to fly at 360 miles per hour. The Boeing was only doing 280 miles per hour in its glide. "We're not going to make it to Colorado Springs," Emma told Jake quietly. "We need more speed." This was where her Top Gun training became critical. In fighter jets, she had learned advanced techniques for handling aircraft in extreme situations. Things they never taught commercial pilots. "I'm going to put us in a steep dive to build up speed," Emma announced. "A steep dive?" Jake looked terrified. "That's not in any commercial pilot manual." "Trust me," Emma said, pushing the controls forward. The Boeing's nose dropped sharply. Passengers screamed as they suddenly felt weightless. The plane was diving at a 20-degree angle, much steeper than any commercial flight ever attempted. But Emma knew what she was doing. She had learned this technique flying F-18 Hornets. By diving steeply, she could build up airspeed, then pull up and use that speed to glide further. "Speed increasing," Jake reported, his knuckles white as he gripped his seat. 300, 320, 340 miles per hour. When they reached 380 miles per hour, Emma pulled back on the controls. The plane's nose came up and they were flying level again, but now much faster. "Brilliant," Jake gasped. "How did you know to do that?" Emma didn't answer. She couldn't explain that this was a combat flying technique she had learned years ago. In the passenger cabin, people were crying and praying. Some were calling their families on their phones to say goodbye. The flight attendants were trying to keep everyone calm, but they were scared too. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain," Emma announced over the intercom, her voice steady and confident. "We are experiencing mechanical difficulties, but I want you to know that I am going to get every single one of you home safely. Please listen to the flight attendants and prepare for an emergency landing." Her calm voice helped, but people could still feel the plane slowly losing altitude. "Denver Center, Skyline 447. We're not going to make Colorado Springs. What other options do we have?" 447, there's a small regional airport at Pueblo, about 40 miles southwest of your position. Runway is only 6,000 feet, but it's your closest option." 6,000 feet. Emma knew that a Boeing 777 normally needed at least 8,000 feet to land safely. Landing on a 6,000-foot runway would require perfect technique and a lot of luck. But again, her Top Gun training gave her an advantage. Fighter jets landed on aircraft carriers, which had runways only 500 feet long. She had made hundreds of carrier landings, some in terrible weather and emergency conditions. "We'll take Pueblo," Emma decided. "Emma, that runway is too short," Jake protested. "We'll run off the end." "Not if I land it right," Emma replied. She was already planning the approach in her head, using techniques she had learned landing F-18s on carrier decks. At 11:15 a.m., they were down to 8,000 feet and still 20 miles from Pueblo Airport. Emma could see the small airport in the distance. "Pueblo Tower, this is Skyline 447 declaring emergency. We have 236 souls on board and are attempting landing with no engine power. Skyline 447, Pueblo Tower. Runway 8 right is clear. Fire and rescue are standing by. Wind is calm. Emma lined up the plane with the runway. This would be the most difficult landing of her career. She had to hit the runway at exactly the right speed in exactly the right spot or they would crash. Gear down, she ordered. Jake lowered the landing gear. This created more drag, which helped slow the plane but also made it lose altitude faster. At 500 feet above the ground, Emma could see the runway clearly. It looked impossibly short for such a big airplane. "You're coming in too fast," Jake warned. "We need to slow down more." But Emma knew better. If she slowed down too much, the plane would fall out of the sky before reaching the runway. She needed just enough speed to make it to the runway but not so much that they couldn't stop. This was exactly like landing on an aircraft carrier. She had to hit a precise spot at a precise speed. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. Jake called out their altitude. The plane crossed over the beginning of the runway. Emma pulled back slightly on the controls and the main wheels touched down with a hard thump. "We're down," Jake shouted. But they weren't safe yet. The plane was rolling down the runway at 150 miles per hour, and there were only 6,000 feet of runway. Emma needed every trick she knew to stop the plane. She deployed the speed brakes, threw the engines into reverse. Even though they weren't providing power, they could still create reverse thrust, and applied maximum wheel brakes. But it wasn't enough. They were still going too fast and running out of runway. This was when Emma used her most advanced Top Gun technique. On aircraft carriers, if a fighter jet couldn't stop normally, it would catch an arresting cable with a hook. The Boeing 777 didn't have a hook, but it had something else. "Jake, when I tell you dump all the fuel." "Dump the fuel? But that's dangerous." "Do it. Now." Jake hit the fuel dump switches. Thousands of gallons of jet fuel poured out of the wings. This suddenly made the plane much lighter and lighter planes stop faster. At the same time, Emma deliberately steered the plane slightly off the center of the runway onto the softer ground beside it. The soft dirt created more resistance and helped slow the plane down. These were techniques no commercial pilot would ever try. But Emma had learned similar moves flying military jets in combat situations. The Boeing 777 finally came to a complete stop just 200 feet from the end of the runway. If the runway had been even 200 feet shorter, they would have crashed. For a moment, the cockpit was completely silent except for the sound of their heavy breathing. We made it," Jake whispered. "How did you do that?" Before Emma could answer, the radio crackled to life. But this wasn't air traffic control. It was a different voice coming from high above. "Skyline 447, this is Viper Flight, 2 F-22 Raptors at 30,000 feet. We've been monitoring your emergency." Emma's heart stopped. F-22 Raptors were the Air Force's most advanced fighter jets. Why were they involved? "We ran your aircraft registration and pilot information through our database," the F-22 pilot continued. "Captain Rodriguez, is your call sign Phoenix?" Jake stared at Emma in complete shock. "Call sign? What's he talking about?" "Affirmative, Viper Flight," Emma replied quietly. "Phoenix confirmed." "Well, I'll be damned." The F-22 pilot's voice was filled with excitement. "Phoenix, this is Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, call sign Viper. I was 2 classes behind you at Top Gun. We all heard the stories about your flying." The whole cockpit went silent. Jake's mouth was hanging open. "Top Gun?" he whispered. "You went to Top Gun?" Over the radio, another F-22 pilot joined the conversation. "Phoenix, this is Captain Williams, call sign Hawk. I've read your file. Youngest pilot to ever graduate Top Gun with highest honors. Flew 47 combat missions in F-18 Super Hornets." Emma closed her eyes. Her secret was out. "Those maneuvers you just pulled," Stevens continued, "the dive for speed, the short runway landing, the fuel dump technique, that was pure Top Gun flying. No commercial pilot could have done what you just did." Jake was staring at Emma like he had never seen her before. "You're a Top Gun pilot?" "A real Top Gun pilot." "Former," Emma corrected quietly. "Phoenix," Stevens's voice came over the radio again, "you just saved 236 lives using skills they only teach at the Navy's elite fighter pilot school. That was some of the best flying I've ever seen." In the passenger cabin, people could hear the radio conversation through the intercom. Passengers were looking at each other in amazement. "Our pilot is from Top Gun?" one passenger whispered. "Like in the movie?" asked another. Rachel, the head flight attendant, rushed to the cockpit. "Captain, the passengers heard everything. They want to know if it's true. Emma looked at Jake, then at Rachel. There was no point hiding it anymore. She picked up the intercom microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Yes, it's true. Before I became a commercial pilot, I was a naval aviator. I graduated from the Navy's Top Gun program and flew fighter jets in combat. The entire plane erupted in cheers and applause. I used that training today to save all of our lives, Emma continued. What we just experienced was not a normal emergency landing. It required techniques that are only taught to military pilots. I want you to know that every single one of you is safe because of the skills I learned serving our country. The applause got even louder. People were crying tears of joy and relief. Over the radio, Stephen spoke again. Phoenix, we're going to escort you to the gate. It's been an honor sharing the sky with you today. As Emma taxied the damaged Boeing 777 to the airport terminal, she could see fire trucks and ambulances waiting. But she could also see something else, 2 F-22 Raptor fighter jets flying overhead in formation, dipping their wings in salute. After the plane stopped at the gate and all 236 passengers were safely off, Jake turned to Emma. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? He asked. Being a Top Gun pilot is incredible. You could have been flying for the airlines as a senior captain years ago with that background. Emma was quiet for a moment. I left the military for personal reasons, she finally said. I wanted a normal life, a quiet life. I didn't want to be treated differently because of what I used to do. But you saved everyone today because of what you used to do, Jake pointed out. That's true, Emma admitted. And I'm glad I had those skills when we needed them. As they walked off the plane, passengers were waiting to thank her. The little girl who had waved at the cockpit window ran up and hugged Emma's leg. Are you really a Top Gun pilot like in the movies? The girl asked. Emma knelt down to the girl's eye level. I was. And today that training helped me bring you home safe to your family. The girl's mother had tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving my daughter. One by one, all 236 passengers came up to thank Emma. Many were crying. Some shook her hand, others hugged her. A few asked for pictures. You're a hero, an elderly man said. You're a real hero. Later that evening, Emma was in the hotel room provided by the airline. The investigation into the engine failures would take days, but initial reports showed that both engines had suffered mechanical problems that should have been impossible to overcome. Her phone rang. It was her old commander from her Navy days. Phoenix, I just saw the news, Admiral Johnson said. Incredible flying today. You made the Navy proud. Thank you, sir. You know, if you ever want to come back to military flying, we could use someone with your skills. The Navy is always looking for experienced pilots to train the next generation. Emma looked out her hotel window at the small Pueblo airport. She could see the Boeing 777 still sitting on the tarmac, surrounded by investigators. I'll think about it, sir, she said. For now, I'm just glad everyone made it home safe. The next morning, Emma's story was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. Commercial pilot saves 236 using Top Gun skills, read one headline. Hidden hero, airline captain's secret military past saves lives, read another. Emma became famous overnight, but she handled it the same way she had handled the emergency, with calm professionalism and quiet confidence. 3 days after the incident, Emma received a special invitation. The President of the United States wanted to meet her at the White House to personally thank her for her heroic actions. I can't believe this is happening, Jake said as they sat in the hotel lobby. He had stayed with Emma to help with all the interviews and investigations. The President wants to meet you. It feels surreal, Emma admitted. I was just doing my job. Your job. Jake laughed. Emma, you saved 236 people using skills that maybe 50 pilots in the whole world have. That's not just doing your job, that's being a hero. The White House ceremony was attended by all the passengers from Flight 447. The little girl who had waved at Emma was there with her parents. The elderly couple who thought they would never see their grandchildren again brought their whole family. Everyone wanted to thank Emma personally. Captain Rodriguez, the President said during the ceremony, your actions represent the very best of American service and sacrifice. You use skills learned in defense of our nation to save innocent lives in civilian service. You are a true American hero. Emma was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. As she stood on the stage looking out at all the faces, passengers she had saved, their families, her fellow pilots, military officers, she felt overwhelmed by the moment. After the ceremony, Admiral Johnson, her old Navy commander, pulled her aside. Phoenix, I have a proposition for you, he said. The Navy wants to create a new training program. We want to teach civilian pilots some basic military techniques that could help them in emergency situations. Things like the maneuvers you used to save Flight 447. Emma was intrigued. What kind of program? We're calling it the Civilian Emergency Aviation Training Program, the Admiral explained. Commercial pilots would come to Navy bases for special training. You would be the head instructor, teaching them advanced techniques that could save lives. Emma thought about it. She could help train other pilots to handle impossible situations. Maybe her Top Gun skills could save even more lives in the future. I'm interested, she said. But I want to keep flying commercial flights too. I don't want to give up being a regular airline pilot. That's perfect, Admiral Johnson smiled. You could fly commercially most of the time and teach at the Navy base a few days each month. The best of both worlds. 6 months later, Emma was back at a Navy base for the first time in years. But now she was an instructor teaching civilian pilots military techniques. Her first class had 20 pilots from different airlines. They were all experienced commercial pilots, but they looked nervous as Emma walked into the classroom in her Navy flight suit. Good morning, everyone, Emma said. I'm Captain Emma Rodriguez, but in this program my call sign is Phoenix. I'm here to teach you some techniques that might save your passengers' lives someday. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. It showed a photo of Flight 447 on the runway in Pueblo. 6 months ago I was just like all of you, a commercial airline pilot flying routine flights. Then one day everything went wrong. Both engines failed, and I had to use techniques I learned in the Navy to save 236 people. The pilots listened carefully as Emma explained the advanced maneuvers she had used. The steep dive to build speed. The short runway landing techniques. The fuel dump procedure. All things they had never learned in civilian flight training. The most important thing I can teach you, Emma continued, is to stay calm under pressure. In the military we train for situations where everything goes wrong at once. We learn to think clearly when everyone around you is panicking. One pilot raised his hand. Captain Rodriguez, how do you stay calm when you know people might die if you make a mistake? Emma paused, remembering that terrifying moment when she realized both engines were failing. You focus on what you can control, she said. You can't control mechanical failures or bad weather. But you can control how you respond. You use your training, you make decisions quickly, and you never give up. The training program was a huge success. Pilots from around the world came to learn from Emma. She taught them not just flying techniques, but the mental training that Top Gun pilots received. How to handle stress, how to make split-second decisions, how to stay focused when everything was going wrong. Meanwhile, Emma continued flying commercial flights for Skyline Airlines. But now everyone knew who she was. Passengers would sometimes recognize her and ask for pictures. Flight attendants were proud to work with the famous Top Gun pilot. Other pilots treated her with deep respect. 1 year after Flight 447, Emma was flying another routine flight to Denver, the same route where the emergency had happened. This time, everything went perfectly. As they approached Denver Airport, she made an announcement to the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are beginning our descent into Denver. As some of you may know, this is the same route where I experienced an emergency exactly 1 year ago today. I want to thank all the passengers on that flight and their families for the support they've shown me this past year. The passengers applauded. Several people on the plane were actually survivors from Flight 447, including the little girl who had waved at the cockpit window. She was now 8 years old and still remembered that scary day. After landing in Denver, the little girl came up to the cockpit with her parents. Captain Phoenix, she said, using Emma's call sign, I want to be a pilot like you when I grow up. Emma knelt down to talk to her. That's wonderful. Study hard in school, especially math and science. And remember, being a pilot isn't about being the best or the fastest. It's about keeping people safe. Will you teach me to fly someday? The girl asked. If you work hard and become a pilot, I promise I'll help train you, Emma said with a smile. 3 years later, Emma's training program had expanded to include pilots from 12 different countries. The techniques she taught had already saved lives in several emergency situations around the world. Emma received a letter from a pilot in Germany who had used her fuel dump technique to land safely after losing an engine. Another pilot in Japan credited Emma's stress management training with helping him handle a severe weather emergency. You're changing aviation forever, Jake told her one day as they prepared for another flight together. Jake had requested to be Emma's regular co-pilot, and they had become a great team. I'm just sharing what I learned, Emma replied. The Navy taught me these skills to defend our country. Now I'm using them to protect civilian passengers. It feels like the right thing to do. Emma's story had inspired many other military pilots to consider civilian aviation careers. The airlines were eager to hire former Top Gun graduates, knowing they brought exceptional skills and training. But Emma remained humble about her fame. She still lived in a small apartment, drove a regular car and treated everyone with kindness and respect. Success hadn't changed who she was. On the 5th anniversary of Flight 447, there was a reunion of all the passengers and crew. They met at the Pueblo airport where Emma had made the emergency landing. The little girl, now 12 years old, had started taking flying lessons. "Captain Rodriguez saved our lives that day," said the elderly man who had called Emma a hero. "But she also showed us what real courage looks like. She stayed calm when we were all scared. She took care of us when we needed someone to trust." Emma looked around at all the faces, people who were alive because of decisions she had made in the most stressful moments of her career. Their children who existed because their parents survived. Their dreams and hopes that continued because Flight 447 had made it safely to the ground. "You all gave me something too," Emma told the group. "You reminded me why I became a pilot in the first place. Not for the excitement or the challenge but to take care of people. To get them home safely to their families." As the sun set over Pueblo Airport, Emma walked out to the runway where she had landed Flight 447 5 years earlier. The runway looked so much longer now than it had that terrifying day. But she remembered every second of that landing, the fear, the focus, the relief when they finally stopped. Jake joined her on the runway. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been on that flight?" he asked. Emma thought about it. Someone else would have been the captain. They would have done their best with the training they had. But would everyone have survived? Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she finally said. "I just know that everything in my life led me to be on that plane that day. My Top Gun training, my combat experience, even my decision to become a commercial pilot, it all came together when those people needed it most." 10 years later, Captain Emma Phoenix Rodriguez was still flying commercial flights and still teaching at the Navy training program. The little girl from Flight 447 had grown up and was now a student at the Naval Academy, planning to become a pilot herself. Emma's techniques had been adopted by airlines worldwide. Her training program had taught thousands of pilots, and her methods had saved hundreds of lives in emergency situations around the globe. But Emma's greatest pride wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the simple fact that 236 people had gone home to their families that day, and that her story had inspired a new generation of pilots to be prepared for anything. As she prepared for another routine flight, Emma looked at her logbook. Thousands of flights, millions of miles, hundreds of thousands of passengers carried safely. But Flight 447 would always be special. That was the day when a commercial pilot became a hero, when a hidden past saved innocent lives, and when Top Gun training proved its worth in the civilian world. Emma Rodriguez, call sign Phoenix, had answered the call when it mattered most. And she had not let anyone down. This story is dedicated to all the men and women who serve in our military and then transition to civilian careers, bringing their exceptional skills and dedication to protect and serve others in new ways. The techniques described in this story are fictional dramatizations, but the courage and professionalism of real pilots, both military and commercial, who keep us safe every day is very real.